rock and roll. We're going to do 2 issues a month. We need writers right now. Jim, you're up. And you said, well, I've never done this before. And I'm like, what? Like you've only written for yourself before. So explain that a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I've written many comics, but I've drawn the comics that I've written. And I don't know if it's that different because I write a very detailed script usually whenever I'm writing for myself. Sometimes artists will actually do what's called writing on the page. And I've tried to do more of that because I think it's interesting if you're part drawing and part writing together, they inform each other. But I've written a lot of stuff over the years that is very detailed. I actually brought a couple of things to show off. For example, very similar to how we work and how we put stories together on the Miro board is what I think of as like an index card system. This is actually the first draft of the Hulk Grand Design.
Oh, wow.
So yeah,
That's cool.
pretty detailed book. There's quite a few
cool.
of these. I had a student call it the fuck it draft. And that meant you're just putting down these ideas because then you put the editor hat back on and you go through and you do another draft. But in this stage, it's just kind of like put out all these ideas, see how they fit together, read through it and see what's missing. It's very easy to fill in if, okay, this doesn't make sense. What actually happened between these two scenes? We need a little bit more information. And so that's your first draft. It's not different than the way I work anyway, and the way that I have been working a lot lately. That B25 story that I just held up, that's one of my most recent comics that I had done before starting at VeeFriends. So I was already kind of working in this way. And you do this, and then you can kind of break that down and think, okay, half of this, goes in the first half of the book, half in the second, and then break it down until you're like, okay, this is what's on a page. This is page 1, this is page 2. So again, very similar to the way I work anyway. And from that point, I basically translate these into script. And the script is a description of what's in the panel, like a physical description. What's happening in that panel? What do we need to see in that panel? You can see exterior of the Space Telescope Science Institute, for example. Pretty straightforward for me to draw or for someone else to draw. And the other part is any text that's going in there. So you see like word balloon, Stewart capitalized. I try to capitalize these things because I grew up reading comics where all the lettering was capitalized. Now it can go either way, but I still kind of like that look. And it just makes it easy then to copy and paste it into the lettering part. I did letter this comic, which I enjoyed a lot. I think the placement of the word balloons helped guide the eye through the page. So I enjoyed that process. First time I've lettered a comic that somebody else drew. Really? Kind of weird.
Yeah, cool.
But yeah, writing wise, it wasn't a lot different than what I would write if I were the one that was going to draw it.
And the other cool thing is like you were actually giving, some reference in here for the artist right on the board, which is nice. Like this is what a control room might look like.
Everything takes research. I didn't know, where do you get data from these telescope satellites, right? Like what does that look like? So as I was looking up, like, how does this actually work? I already had the reference there because I was trying to just wrap my head around how would this information actually come in to our world.
Yeah.
And as I did that, I would just pull down images. Yeah. So again, you do research in almost any story, pretty straightforward in that way. And I brought another script along kind of to illustrate another. This one's pretty close too. This is almost like a second step. So for a while, I would print out my scripts, and you see that on this side, and it's the same format. It's panels, it's description of what's going on in the panel, and it is dialogue for word balloons or captions. And in this case, I used to staple these things together to make a little book because maybe I'd go to the coffee shop to draw. I would draw my layouts directly onto the script.
Nice.
Yeah. So again, just to let you know that I didn't just show up here with no writing experience. It was just,
right.
Not writing for others, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the nice thing is whenever we had Ben, start working on this, we met up, we talked through the script. He did layouts. And again, we met up, talked through the layouts, gave notes. If he had any questions, I was accessible. So we could kind of work closely back and forth as he was developing the visuals for it.
Yeah. And then like all throughout the process, we might throw, notes on for ourselves, add the star map over here. I think Gary, that was a Gary note, right? Like make sure it's clear that it's a star map. In the final book. Yeah, this is it's a fun process because like you said, there's those traditional ways of doing story cards and things like that, and a lot of screenwriters always do that way,
Yeah,
a lot
I
of
took a
novels.
screenwriting class, man, with the showrunner, and I can't think of the show, but it's a Netflix show that had run several seasons, and she had moved back to Pittsburgh and was teaching screenwriting, and I took that, and I was working on a comic, of course, but it was really interesting to kind of like see her methods of working, and they use those index cards just like I described, very similar to the Miro board, but they do it in a writer's room where they'll have a giant, like cork board or whatever, and they're literally pinning these things up or moving them around so that you can see what's happening, and you can easily adjust what's happening.
Yeah, I've studied all that too, and like we're oh, I'm 50, you're right behind me, but like we grew up in the age of analog.
Mhm.
When we were learning to do this, it was like you might not have even had a computer really, like I think a word
Definitely.
processor or something like that. So I'd be like, whoa, this is like a lot to write. And you usually have to pair up with a comic writer when you're an artist or vice versa. But I think both you and I just decided like we did a lot of mini comics and just decided to just write our own kind of things from the get-go. So
And I'm a
uh,
big believer in that. Like if anybody's watching this and you're creative, it doesn't have to be a comic book maker. It could be a stand-up comic, a musician, anything. Write some of your own material. You're most likely to do your best work because you know what your strengths are and where your interests lie. I think having a writing practice is a really important part of any creative outlet.
yeah, boy, I'm looking at these pages and you mentioned lettering. I was like, I remember back in like 1998, I would go to my stepmom's house, print out lettering on a Mac or just a computer, whatever she had, and then I would cut the lettering out and paste up with glue stick right on the board. And I still have those pages somewhere, but I was like, man, what how far we've come with fonts. Shout
No
out to
doubt.
Glambot, Nate Pecos, and Comic Craft, making our job a lot easier because you've also done hand lettering, which is insane. That's an insane craft to make that right. So here we are. Like that's kind of why I wanted to talk and make this comics, like making comics now. Like we're trying to innovate, not just speed up the process, but also make it easier to work and collaborate together across the world. Um, and it's just such a fun process. People ask what we're doing all day on our team. This is a lot of it. There's a lot when we're writing, it's a lot of this deep diving into research, making sure we're getting things correct. And I'll tell you, for like the Gary fans that are here, mainly like, how does Gary think? What's Gary? Because Gary can't be here for every show, but like Gary is very meticulous about the facts. He like wants to know like what ages and what dates things happened, how old were the characters on what dates. It's way more in depth than people would think. I almost hope that like one day we can just videotape all of that, like that actual
Be
process
interesting.
of doing that. I think it would be a cool side for people to see of Gary actually getting into the weeds of a story.
Yeah, I can give you examples of that too.
Yeah,
At some point, we have a speed. I have the speed of what this object is traveling at, and Gary's like, "Where do you get that speed from?"
yeah,
And it was the three eye atlas that you alluded to, DJ.
yep,
Again, just looking into like what does a if an asteroid's coming for Earth, what kind of speed are we looking at? And I figured that was an easy asteroid to get reference on at the time,
yeah,
or some kind of solar system object, whatever that thing was. But to your point, yes, he asked those questions, and in that case, I was ready for it.